In this video, we're going to be talking about renting versus buying a home. And of course, we're going to be going over the pros and the cons. And then stick around because we'll also be talking about a little bit of my experience when it comes to owning a home coming up. Hello, fellow wealth builders, and welcome back to the TruFinancials channel. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about renting versus owning a home. But first, if you are new here, my name is Dennis, and on this show, we love to talk about personal finance, investing, and retirement to help build your wealth. So consider subscribing today, and don't forget to hit that bell to get notifications when new videos and live streams go up. This is a very popular topic of discussion in the financial world. Is it worth renting a home instead of buying one, or is it just flat out better to just buy a home and just go with that? Now, of course, there are pros and cons to both sides. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about those here today. But the biggest thing when it comes to actually renting or buying a home is it's going to be best whatever fits your financial future. Now, as we talk about a lot on this channel, personal finance is just that. It is personal. So not everything is going to work for every single person, and the pros might not be the best pros for somebody, and the cons might not be that bad for somebody else. So always take that into consideration when seeing the differences between renting and owning a home. And before we get started with the pros and the cons, let me know in the comment section down below, do you currently rent or own your home? I'd like to hear from you in the community. Let's look at the pros first on the renting side. The easiest one that a lot of people like to talk about, of course, is the cost of maintenance is covered by the landlord. And that is a big deal because it can get really expensive to have to cover a lot of different expenses that go on with having an apartment. Of course, if there's any appliances that break down, or if there's kind of like a bug maintenance or water maintenance or electricity maintenance needed, all of that stuff is covered by the landlord. So you don't have to actually worry about that when it comes to problems popping up. So it's a lot easier to be able to move when you are in an apartment versus when you own a home. Now, of course, a lot of apartments do have a 12-month contract, so that might be a little bit trickier when it comes to having to either get out of the contract or waiting for it to end, since a lot of the contracts that go month to month tend to be more expensive when it comes to renting. But it's a lot easier than having to worry about a full house being sold and then having to potentially cover 2 mortgages all at once. So typically, it's going to be a lot easier and on the pro side for renting to be able to move to different locations. So another one is that you're not technically paying directly for taxes and private mortgage insurance, which is PMI. You do technically pay for the taxes inside your rent because then the landlord is obviously charging you enough to be able to cover those things. But in actuality, you're not paying for like private mortgage insurance and you're not paying for the taxes directly. Whereas a homeowner, you do have to pay for private mortgage insurance if you have a certain type of mortgage that has that on the contract. And another pro for renting is going to be location. So you do get a lot more location availability than you would with purchasing a home. And what I mean by this is if you like to live in like an urban area, you typically will find a lot more options when it comes to renting, and you're going to be a lot closer to a lot of great job opportunities, such as in the downtown areas, or even for events such as like sports or just entertainment in general. Those typically happen around the downtown/urban areas. So you're more likely going to be closer into those areas if you're willing to go into the renting side of things. So now some of the cons when it comes to renting a home or an apartment is that you're on the landlord's time when it comes to maintenance, right? So we talked about how maintenance is covered, but we also have to look into the idea that it is based off of how long it takes them to be able to get those things done. Now, most of them will have it where there's a certain time limit they have to get things done by, but obviously also too, they do have the option of choosing who they have get things covered. So, you know, it might not be the best of the best when it comes to services. If you need something done like plumbing or electricity, they might even skimp out and go with somebody a lot cheaper so they can personally save some money, so you don't get the benefits of getting some of the best services available. So another con is that rent never ends until you stop renting a property. And then also too, that rent technically does go up typically almost every single year for people. So the cost of living actually goes higher than it does for owning a home. If you have a fixed rate for interest, that one stays the same every single month and it doesn't cost you anything more than what was already pre-planned, versus when you're renting, every single year they can increase your rent, so that way you would have to be paying more unless you decided to move out, which obviously costs money to be able to do all that moving. So always taking that into consideration that, you know, renting will just never end if you are planning on always always renting. And then of course, one of the big ones is that fact that you miss out the opportunity of the value of a home going up in value if you are always renting. So you never get that value and equity to be able to actually do anything with, whether it's moving it over to a bigger house if you want to keep moving up, or actually taking that money out and doing something else with it if you decided to pull out equity from your home. So values of homes go up versus if you're renting, you don't get any value if that property goes up over the course of those next couple of years. And then probably one of my least favorite things when it comes to renting is the fact that you can't actually do a lot of changes to the home or the apartment where you have to actually get permission from the landlords to be able to do anything. So you're very constricted in your visual of how you want your house to be because you had to get that permission, or you won't actually able to even change anything in the home because it's not technically your property. So now for the pros of buying a home, and this is going to be the biggest one, of course, is actually eventually owning that home. And that's a big deal for a lot of people because for most, owning a home is going to be one of the biggest assets that they have in their portfolio. So looking into the idea of actually being able to own your property is a very big deal. And as we just talked about renting, that if you keep on renting, you eventually just have to keep paying that payment, plus it keeps going up. Where when you actually own a home, and if you are paying monthly payments, eventually, as long as you don't pull more money out of the loan, you actually end up paying it off, and then you completely own that property. And then of course, to kind of go alongside that as well, is that the value of your home can go up. Now that's not a guarantee, of course, but statistically, if you look at the history of home ownership, the value does go up as well. So that means if you wanted to upgrade to bigger homes, you actually get more value out of those homes that you currently have if it's already paid off, or if you're still paying payments on it. You're going to build up equity in there for you to be able to move on to something bigger and better if your family continues to grow, or if you just want more space for yourself. And then one of the things for me personally when it comes to owning a property is that eventually you can actually make that into a rental property and end up becoming a landlord if that's something that interests you and you want to do in the future, so that way you can create some passive income. So another pro of owning your own home is the idea that you don't have to worry too much about neighbors. Now of course that can depend on the type of home that you buy and where you buy, but typically most homes will have a little bit of a distance between the next house, and so that way you get a little bit more privacy. Now the cons of owning a home. Now of course the biggest one is the fact that you cover all costs when it comes to repairs and any other types of expenses. And this is something I'll get into here in just a little bit when it comes to my experience of owning a home. But yes, you're covering all the different aspects of repairs. So if your AC goes out, if your roof gets damaged for any reasons, if you have to replace a door or a window, that's all things that are covered on your end and nobody else's. So you always want to be cautious with that because that is a hidden cost that most people don't pay attention to when it comes to the differences of owning a home and renting. So another big con is the idea that it can take a long time to sell your home. And that's a big deal for a lot of people because if you can't sell your home very quickly and you are required or needed to move for whatever reason, you can be ending up with having 2 house payments at one time, and that could be very detrimental to your budgets and being able to manage your money properly. So, take into consideration that, having to move if you needed to can be a very difficult task in comparison to renting, where if you're up with your lease, you can just leave and go somewhere else versus having to actually deal with that property. So another con to kind of go alongside that is the cost of transactions when it comes to buying and selling your home. As we all know, it does cost you money to actually be able to buy and sell. Most of the time we don't see that because it goes into the back end of actually selling or buying your home. But take in consideration, having an agent can be very beneficial to you. So not in any bad way to say that. I actually have an interview that I will link right above here for you if you'd like to check that out. It actually is an interview with Austin Frizzoco, who helps us actually talk about best ways to find the agent that will work best for you, so that way you can get the most out of buying and selling your own home. So those transaction costs can really add up if you are buying and selling at a very fast pace over the course of a small amount of time. Just always take that in consideration because that can cost you on the back end. And again, like I mentioned, most people don't end up seeing that cost. And one con that actually is kind of partially in the pro category when it comes to owning a home is the idea of having equity in your home. Now, as I mentioned, it is a pro because of course that is going to increase your assets, which increases your net worth, but that can also be a word of caution because a lot of times people end up taking that money out from their home and putting it towards like debts and other things, and that can actually leave people what they call house poor, which then in the long run can actually put you at a disadvantage when it comes to actually being a homeowner. And another con would actually be the idea that your home doesn't necessarily go up in value as quickly as some people might think. So a lot of times when you buy a home, the first couple of years, you might not even see a significant increase in value. Now, of course, as I mentioned earlier, that in the long run, it has been historically shown that values of homes do go up, but that's not always the case. And sometimes we can even have downturns in the markets like we did in 2007 and 2008, where houses did go down in value. So that put a lot of people underwater on their loans. And if you're curious about what it means to be underwater on a loan, I will have a video linked up here. You can check that out after this video is completed. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about me having owned a home for a couple of years now and some of the things that I've noticed when it comes to being a homeowner and versus renting. And one of the biggest things, as I mentioned, and this is of course part of the pros and the cons, is the cost of home ownership. It really does cost a lot of money to be able to maintain your home. There's always something kind of breaking. There's always something that needs repair and attending to, versus if you just rent, you can actually just have somebody get that stuff taken care of for you, so you don't even have to worry about it. But one of the biggest things I hear from a lot of people online is the fact that sometimes their rent actually costs just as much as what they see on average for a mortgage. And sometimes that can be true as far as the initial cost of the mortgage, but a lot of things that they don't consider is of course the expenses that come along with being a homeowner. As we talked about, if something happens to your AC unit, if a window breaks, if something goes wrong, you're going to be the one that has to take care of it. And so that's what I like to call a phantom cost, because you don't actually see those costs initially, but they are there and they will pop up. So it's not a matter of if, it's definitely a matter of when it comes to expenses for your home. Is it better to rent or is it better to own a home? And I'm a big fan of owning your home, of course, because that will help build assets in your asset category, which then will help with your net worth. But I'm not a fan of going into a home when we're not ready. So you always want to pay attention to when it's best to go into a home versus when it's best to be actually renting. So I definitely think that renting is a great option for a lot of people, and depending on your certain season of life, it might be the better option versus actually buying a home. So before buying my home, I actually did do renting for a couple of years prior. That way it was actually being able to give me the opportunity to save some money, have a good down payment on the house. But of course we ended up buying the house outright with cash and not having to even worry about a mortgage. So I didn't have that worry when it came to purchasing the home. So I do have a little bit of a different take on that because I didn't have to worry about a mortgage. But at the end of the day, I would say that it's really a good idea to kind of put it in the pros and cons category, kind of like we talked about today. And then you can even do additional extensive research on, the different options when it comes to renting or buying a home and what might work best for you in whatever season that you're currently in your life. Because like I mentioned, sometimes it might just be a better option to rent for a short while and then look into purchasing a home versus actually just going straight into purchasing that home. And for other people, it might be a good time to actually be purchasing a home. So take those kind of things into consideration and see what works best for you, so that way you don't accidentally overstep in what you can afford when it comes to a home, and you're not put into a position where you're not happy with your home and it becomes more of a nightmare than a dream home. And always consider this too, that a lot of times whatever home that you purchase isn't going to be your forever home. So you're going to be most likely moving from one place to another. So it might not have to be something where you're stuck with forever. So earlier in the video, I did ask if you are currently renting or owning your home. Let me know as well, what's one of the biggest pros and cons with whichever option you are currently with. If you enjoyed this video, do not forget to hit that like button. And then you can also share this out on your favorite social media site to help benefit others. And then if you're not yet subscribed, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below. And thank you so much, fellow wealth builders, for watching, and have a great day. All right, if you made it to the end of this video, I have two more here for you. The top video is going to be my most recent release, and then the bottom one here is going to be a playlist with all my videos from my home buying series.